Hi, my name is Remix Review Guy, and I'm really glad to review remixes. In this video, we're taking a look at modern sample-based dance pop, a genre of music that hasn't had the best reputation for creativity in recent years, maybe even ever. But one artist has managed to put her own instantly recognisable stamp on this field, Victoria Beverly Walker, aka PinkPantheress. With her coy and slightly whimsical storytelling and a taste in sampling that serves as catnip for fans of turn-of-the-millennium dance music, she's spent the past few years building up an increasingly less cult and more widespread following, culminating in this year's mixtape and Mercury Music Prize nominee, Fancy That. A breezy but impactful 9-track statement that used various iconic snippets from club classics and indie rock staples to weave personal yarns about relationships, fame and drug deals. And true to the spirit of dance music, we now have a remix complement to it as well, titled Fancy Some More, which expanded the modest runtime of the original into an extensive 22-track overhaul, featuring an absurdly stacked lineup of artists from dance, pop and dance pop. For pure remix celebrity credentials, this album has been heralded by some as this year's equivalent of Brat, and it's completely different but also still Brat. The Charli XCX remix album from last year that proved to be the year's finest of the genre. Is that what we get here though? Will these new versions make you fancy the album even more? Or will these noises just make you think? What the fuck is that? Well, first, let's make the original's acquaintance. Glad to meet you. One of my recent fascinations in music has been derogatory genre names. Things like butt rock, mumble rap, landfill indie, yacht rock. Names for genres that were clearly coined with some inherent disdain for the style of music in question. One such term that hasn't really caught on but I think is particularly relevant to modern music is record collection rock. This is a phrase invented by music journalist Simon Reynolds in the early 90s to describe artists whose music felt like an explicit reflection of the music that they listened to. One example that Reynolds gives is Lenny Kravitz. You listen to Are You Gonna Go My Way, you know this is a man who listens to Jimi Hendrix. Now, this isn't necessarily a dig at anyone who takes inspiration from an artist. In his early years, Dizzy Rascal said his favourite album of all time was In Utero by Nirvana. And yet, his music has pretty much never sounded like Nirvana. And nor is record collection rock necessarily a detrimental style in and of itself. You look at LCD Sound System, their main appeal was that their music represented James Murphy's cool vintage musical interests. The Fall, The Human League, Can, Pavement, but presented them all through his own lens. Similarly with Jeff Barrow from Portishead's band Beak, who are kind of like LCD Sound System but further down the musical iceberg, taking inspiration from 70s no wave and the Silver Apples. Simon Reynolds actually said himself you can measure the effectiveness of record collection rock by how weird and far-reaching an artist's record collection is.
But this is recordings of old trains.
And certainly in the 2020s you can also use that scale to identify bad music. I know, save some fish in the barrel for the others, Ian. But you look at the Ava Maxes and David Guettas of the world, they've just taken big obvious things that everyone knows and said, I am going to hitch my wagon to this, whilst making it worse. I'll admit this isn't a perfect comparison. The rock artists I mentioned earlier are more about inspiration, trying to recreate the exact feel of an artist. Rather than taking actual lyrics or melodies or recordings from them. But I do see commentators on YouTube complaining that many artists now are just shamelessly reinterpreting 70s and 80s styles, like Sabrina Carpenter interpolating Diana Ross, Sam Fender poaching Bruce Springsteen, or Doja Cat mainlining Janet Jackson. And if you can level any criticism at these artists, maybe it's that there just doesn't feel like there's a sense of discovery about it all. Like, no one's digging up any forgotten gems here or any obscure piece of music that you thought only you were a big fan of. These are references to some of the biggest artists of all time, just 2 generations removed. So, where does PinkPantheress fit in all this? Pink, as she guardedly shortens to, given that there's another artist called Pink, is an example of a modern artist you could perhaps call record collection dance. You put on PinkPantheress's album Fancy That, the first thing you hear is one of the most distinctive dance artists of the 90s.
My name is Pink and I'm really glad to meet you.
The opening track, Illegal, takes its keyboard refrain directly from Dark and Long, Dark Train by Underworld. Dark Train is one of my favourite progressive trance tracks from the 90s. It features in one of my favourite films, Trainspotting. So, aesthetically for me, I already feel seen by this track. This isn't a sample that many artists have used over the years. It doesn't feel like it's been drained of all its resources in the way that other samples like Super Freak or Genius of Love have been. But how is the sample used exactly? Illegal is a song about a drug deal. It's been confirmed this is effectively about Pink's relationship with her dealer, so not a huge leap in associations. Musically though, this does feel like a change in context, given that the riff has been placed over a UK garage beat. One of the main things I remember about the late 90s, early noughties is that progressive trance and UK garage had very little crossover between the two. Yeah, you had trance tracks with break beats and you had garage tracks that had some rave elements to them, but otherwise those sounds were generally pretty tribal and territorial. And that's a gap that's certainly closed up a lot more as dance music's position in the mainstream has evolved, but to put these elements together as casually as Pink has would genuinely have felt like a big deal back in 2001. But Pink has one secret weapon on this album that particularly brings the magic, and that secret weapon is... she's British. Not only does that mean she has access to a more esoteric frame of samples than your average US artist, but it also means she possesses some of those good old British manners.
My name is Pink and I'm really glad to meet you.
Just the act of formally introducing yourself to someone, drug dealer or otherwise, has made her a prime template for TikTokers trying to navigate their way around basic human interaction. The album's second track, Girl Like Me, cranks up the energy somewhat more. The vocal interpolation on this one is from Basement Jaxx. This is another move that seems like it's been designed to curry my favour specifically. I've never been the biggest Basement Jaxx fan, but one of their songs that I do genuinely really enjoy is Romeo, which is the one Jaxx song that no one else I know seemed to like that much. I think its production is delightfully quirky, Kelly LaRock's vocals are great, those backing vocals are funny as shit. And Pink seems to have taken that spirit of daft backing vocals to heart on this album, particularly on this track. I don't think the production on Girl Like Me is quite as unique as that of Basement Jaxx, but it's assertive, and the stomp once again has that speed garage swagger to it. Plus there's a few fun little melodic additions here and there. And just the sheer strut of it I find really Moorish. The third track, Tonight, is where any sense of nostalgia baiting goes out of the window for me though. Because its intro comes from a Panic at the Disco song. A band who I've never particularly had any interest in following their work. I know that one song they did, I've seen the bottle clip, that's about it. Still, it does make for a unexpectedly cinematic intro to this song, although the rest of the production is a fun little sidestep into DJ Seinfeld-esque lo-fi house. With those 80s lounge chords and 808 cowbell, although there is another somewhat gratuitous pop rock reference in the pot here. Kings of Leon, seriously? Yeah, this reference feels a little bit on the nose for me, I've got to be honest. That said, Pink does have this kind of dork nerd aesthetic to her flirting on this album. So she makes it sound like the kind of phrase I could imagine a character in a sitcom applying when they try and make the move. This floaty house vibe continues with the following track, Stars. with another noughties rock sample, this time from Stars in Your Eyes by Just Jack.
Why do you wanna go and put stars in their eyes?
This was a UK indie rock hit about the folly of chasing fame. It's not the first time she's sampled this. Her 2021 song Attracted to You made use of the Sister Sledge-esque guitars from the original.
I thought I found the answer to it. Eternal happiness tonight.
Here though she takes the vocals instead, which have a semi-rapped Mike Skinner style delivery to them, and honestly I think they actually work better in Pink's song than the original. I don't know, something about that lad's swagger just seems more tailor-made to dance than rock. We then get a brief intermission in which Pink addresses the project executive producer, Axel Arvid, who I couldn't find out much about other than he's a Jack Harlow guy. Like Brat and many other pop albums these days, Pink's got a core production team working with her on this project, including DJs Count Baldor and Jakari, bedroom popper Oscar Scheller, beatmaker Glazier, and Phil. How you doing, Phil? All seem to be up-and-comers or background guys, but it's nice that the main overseer gets a shout-out, in the form of an official visualizer no less. And then we get some drum and bass, courtesy of Noises. This track samples Sun Toucher, a hip-hop song by Groove Armada featuring Jeru the Damager. I probably wouldn't have guessed this was a Groove Armada sample if I hadn't been told it, because it actually sounds kind of lively. It's a very smooth, almost loungy kind of up-tempo song about hearing noises and thinking someone might have broken into your house when your parents are out. And the chorus itself is lifted from another rapper, Nardo Wick.
What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?
That's a song from 2021, so this album isn't just a noughties throwback, it's also a pandemic throwback. But yeah, I particularly like the juxtaposition of the slightly intense subject matter and the placid liquid drum and bass backing, and also the Wick's hook, which seems like a weirdly deadpan response to the situation. Then there is quite a violent mood shift for the next song as we get Nice to Know You, which for me is the most uncanny song on the album. The main vocal hook on this one is taken from a song called Spiral by William Orbit featuring the Sugababes.
Nothing's really safe, but everything's amazing.
Which I'll admit is not a song I had any familiarity with prior to listening to this album. The sample I did recognise on my first listen though was the drums, which are from my favourite song by The Streets, It's Too Late.
What was getting near, all the silence after the cheers? I didn't know that it was over.
That measured two-step stomp and that timpani drum jumped straight out at me when I heard this. And the overall feeling of the track isn't dissimilar either, given that it's a breakup song with heavy synthesized strings over it. I don't know if these were played or if they were found somewhere, but whilst I like the individual ideas at play here, the samples feel like they're doing a little too much heavy lifting as far as the overall direction of the track goes. It's a song I want to like more than I do, but it feels like it's lacking some of the nuance of the rest of the album for me. By contrast, I kind of want to like the following track Stateside less than I do, because it has STD Sound System himself, the Dare, on production. I wish I came up with that name, STD Sound System, I really do. Thank you, Internet. Honestly, at this point I've made my peace with the fact that, for all I can't stand his own work, the Dare does genuinely seem to be a consistently solid collaborator. But as it stands, this is probably the best thing he's been involved with to date. The vocal refrain on this one is from Freak Like Me by Adina Howard. Although given that it was famously covered by the Sugababes over a Gary Newman instrumental and the original was from before Pink's time, it may have been... oh, whatever, who cares how she found it. People are allowed to like music from before they're born, why shouldn't they? And then there's the title hook.
I tracked your plane ride, the one tonight.
And that's been borrowed from...
Adrenaline rush, the moment we touch.
Oh, Spiral again. Okay. She probably did go to the Sugababes well for Freak Like Me then, my bad. But this one feels like the most developed production out of any of the tracks here. You've got this one beat guitar loop that sounds like it's from some French touch inspired filter disco track that I can't place. Like Mojo or Spiller, that kind of thing, but I can't pick out the exact sample. And honestly, that's half the fun. I saw a video from Open Mike Eagle talking about how Who Sampled is effectively just a database of people being reported for theft, and since seeing that, I actually quite like it now when there's missing samples on that site, because it's like, alright, got away with it. And then the album ends on Romeo, and as the title implies, this is another song that samples Basement Jaxx, specifically their song Good Luck. That's some prize trolling right there. I like the idea of Basement Jaxx fans looking up the PinkPantheress song that samples Romeo, being like, I swear it was around here somewhere. This one effectively takes the grand drama of Romeo and transposes it into more of a celebratory major key aesthetic than the original's Kicking to the Curb anthem. I think also this song has some of the funniest lyrics on the album.
You're my Romeo, and I just changed your name, now it's Romeo.
My partner often says to me she doesn't enjoy songs with someone's name in the title because she can't relate to them. So it's good of Pink to find a little loophole for people like her. Also like how Pink starts to outline a step-by-step guide to relationship etiquette.
Step 1, don't let yourself fall in love.
And then it immediately falls apart at step 2.
Step 2, Romeo, there's something in the air tonight.
That is post-structuralist songwriting at its finest. So yeah, fancy that. I actually enjoyed this album back when I bought it earlier in the year, and listening to it for this review, I still enjoy it now. Like some of her contemporaries, she is a pretty sample-oriented artist, but unlike your Ava Maxes or your David Guettas, it feels to me like the samples being used on this album actually mean something to her, and that they're being pieced together in a more cohesive personal narrative. Although delving into it in this much detail did make me realise that Pink is still kind of in a work in progress area of her sound. If it's anything, it's more of a short digestible compendium of a few weird little tales that happened. Moments that make you think, well, fancy that. And you know what? I'm all for that kind of low stakes storytelling. Not everything needs to be Lord of the Rings. But the thing about a more casual musical storytelling is it opens the door for a lot of reinterpretation as well. And yeah, Fancy That has a fairly open narrative and a lot of room for the musical multiverse to weave its magic. But it's one thing to sample your heroes. What happens when you actually meet them?
The same as me, knocking on it some Juki tea.
So, last year during my review of Charlie XCX's remix album Still Brat, I made the following comment. It does also feel like a risk that all pop remix albums going forward will just be a cavalcade of guest vocalists and anonymous producers slapdashly thrown together in the hope of creating something with anywhere near the majesty of this project. Well, thus far it seems my fears have been unfounded, because I listened to well over 200 remix albums this year, and literally the only one that shows any obvious inspiration from Still Brat was PinkPantheress's Fancy Some More. Because yes, this does have a veritable red carpet's worth of names here on collaboration duties, but right from the off we can see that it's a different beast to Still Brat. Fancy Some More is split into 2 discs of reworks, the first of which is focused on guest vocal features, the second of which is dedicated to production-based remixes. With that said, the first disc does have some overlap between these 2 concepts, but we start off with a new version of Illegal that is pretty much the same production as the original with some minor tweaks, and a new guest verse from Brazilian artist Anitta. This was an artist I hadn't heard of prior to doing this review, which of course means that she has 18 million YouTube subscribers. I swear they're going to take my music critic license off me any day now. Just like Pink, Anitta also has a song in her catalogue called Romeo, so she's clearly a very good fit for collaborator. And yet for me this version makes a somewhat awkward start to the project. The lyrics are in Spanish, which isn't a problem for me. I like multilingual lyrics in songs.
My name's Larissa, aunque tengo otro nombre.
It does mean that I'm a little bit limited in my ability to analyse the content here, given that I'm having to rely on Google Translate to give me the gossip. As far as I can tell, the lyrics zone in on a similar theme to the original, but it feels more overtly flirty and less drug-related, which is fine, but feels like a less interesting line of thought to pursue. The issue I have is the little production shifts just very self-consciously scream, "Hey, check out our guest feature." But then the beat just abruptly crashes back in, as if to say, alright, the novelty's out of the way, let's just get on with it. And then once the guest section is done, the track just flits back to Pink's breathy outro. Almost like the first half didn't even happen. It's like, come on, if you're going to open with some guest vocals, at least have them affect the overall narrative of the song a bit more in depth than this. There are 4 other reworks on this first disc that just stick heavily to the original instrumental but add a guest verse in, and a few of them suffer from similar issues with integrating the new vocals. You've got a new version of Tonight with former Little Mix member Jade, whose previous work I have been enjoying, particularly on her collaboration with Confidence Man earlier this year.
What did Tina say? Tina said you're a cunt.
And the Aussie Ravemeisters actually brought out a kind of sassier side to Jade, which is sorely absent here. Instead, the new lyrics that she brings to the table are just standard love fare.
I know I'm your obsession. I insist in the sexual tension.
I'm kind of reminded of a Top of the Pops repeat I watched recently where Lionel Richie charted in the late 90s with a song that felt like it was trying to shoehorn every romantic ballad cliche into one all-purpose love dump.
And then you blessed my life with your sweet, sexy way.
Yeah, that's kind of what I get here. On the subject of sassiness, the first one of these 5 guest verse versions that really does it for me is Noises featuring rapper JT. A member of the group City Girls who's now stepping solo. This is the first of the features on this disc that I feel is vocally offering a really assertive contrast with Pink.
I used to step on hoes, I upgraded the stumping. I'm with my bitches shaking ass for pounds in London.
Admittedly, this verse does feel a little bit general and not that bespoke to this particular song. It feels less like a rap about noises and more like ODB pulling some lyrics out of his arse for Mariah Carey's Fantasy. But the contrast in energy is really fun here. There's a nice little sub-narrative of, yeah, you break into my house, he'll be going home in an ambulance, followed by a hearse. The one of these guest verse remixes that I think really works is the version of Romeo featuring Rachel Chinouriri, an artist who recently supported Sabrina Carpenter's O2 tour, and you can definitely hear a similar sense of humour on play in her lyrics. She shouts out her ideal guy as being someone who could make beats with her in the studio or move a sofa for her. There's also a fun little rhyme of Paris with embarrassed. And yeah, I feel like this version gives us a singer who properly matches Pink's freak. And then the other straight up guest verse version features none other than the Aussie Queen of Pop herself, Kylie Minogue, who mostly seems to have settled into legacy artist status at this point. Or at least I would have said that if she hadn't just bagged Christmas #1 in the UK. Yeah, I had to delete quite a lot of my script because of this. This is why I need to do my videos in a timely fashion. Anyway, she crops up fairly late in the game on Stateside, with a bridge vocal that feels like it probably fits in better than many of the other features. Even if it does appear to be one of the shortest contributions. But it beds in really well, and we also get a little reinterpretation of the Freak Like Me vocal refrain here. Just to remind us of Kylie's heritage. Now, the other 7 reworks on this first disc match up the new guest verses with significant changes in the production, and for me, this is where the results start to get a bit more interesting. We have a second version of Illegal, this time containing members of K-pop band 17, who are not averse to rinsing recognisable samples in their own work. kind of like if Ava Max was actually having fun. On this remix, however, the production gets a more advertently generic 90s rave switch up, featuring some overactive electric pianos and breakbeat. On the original Illegal, that underworld sample and those two-step beats both feel like really precise details that hold a candle for the uniqueness of what made those old genres exciting. But on this remix, it's more like it's just trying to be generally ravey, replacing that candle with a Glade plugin. It doesn't help that this new backing feels completely at odds with 17's vocals, which are buried by the over-enthusiastic piano. I know K-pop is a broad church stylistically, but these harsh auto-tune mumbles are really not cut out for this in-your-face production. Pink collaborates with another K-pop artist on this disc, that being Yves from the band Luna, and this ends up being a lot more successful. On her version, Stars is broken down to a much more incrementally building breakbeat suite that gives the guest vocals a lot more room to breathe. And it actually makes for a significantly more interesting production as a result. The stylistics feel a little more interchangeable on this one, with some 2010s EDM chords on the chorus and a drum and bass break that comes in the last third. And this feels like it retains some of the genre dynamism of Fancy That much more cogently. The biggest change up on this disc comes courtesy of the new version of Girl Like Me featuring Oklou, taking one of the original album's most gung-ho bangers and turning it into a light trip-hop track.
We were trapped in the classic mystery. You'll be alright, you'll be alright.
This hits upon a much more rarefied source of inspiration that I discussed quite recently on this channel, that being Madonna's Ray of Light. It has that really fluid, mood-laden vibe of William Orbit with backward strings and a beep synthesizer. That sample-wise almost sounds like it came out of Drinking in LA by Bran Van 3000. It sounds fantastic, Oklou and Pink's vocals integrate really nicely together, and it makes for the first genuinely surprising take on this project. Another curveball comes from the Bladee version of Stateside, a Swedish rapper who also appeared on Still Brat.
I must confess I'm under stress, I'm under pressure in my head, I'm 6 feet underneath my...
And is notable for being the only guest artist on that project who I completely neglected to say anything about in my original review. Honestly, I just didn't find his guest verse on Rewind that interesting at all, so I completely glossed over it. And that feels unfair given that I keep seeing music magazines and fans online waxing lyrical about what an underrated artist Bladee is, so going into this review I decided I was going to give him a fair shake this time. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I listened to his version of Stateside I barely noticed he was on it. In fairness, a lot of that was because I was taken in by the massive production overhaul from beatmaker Glazier, refreshing this into an emotive slice of cloud rap. But also because Bladee is rapping in a reverb-soaked falsetto that makes his vocals blend in with Pink pretty seamlessly. I did look up the lyrics for this, and I kinda wish I hadn't because I just found all of them annoying. You've got what appears to be Bladee learning how to say British place names. Oh, bravo, well done. Oh, don't they grow up so fast. Elsewhere he drops some emo bars. And then just flexes about how he looks. I'm sure this means something to someone, but to me it just sounds like mumble rap for people who find most mumble rappers too threatening. Definitely not going to slag on the production though, I do think Glazier's beat is something of a delight. One other hefty vibe flip comes from the Ravyn Lenae version of Romeo, swapping out the dramatic orchestral basement jack stuff for a more slinky 6/8 progressive R&B suite. That that sounds like it's going for Thundercat or Yves Tumor to me. She sounds good on this, but the melodic content on this one sounds kind of undernourished, just slightly muffled and not particularly well filled in over the beat. And that kind of nebulous midpoint production is a big problem with the remaining 2 tracks on this disc. You've got Zara Larsson's version of Stateside, which is taken over by a hefty beat that just kind of flattens everything else in the mix. Apart from some rumbling that sounds like an 8-bit dragon's tummy rumbling, Larsson's lyrics don't really seem like they're bringing that much new to the table other than some fine little vocal flexes at the end of her rap. But honestly, it's too difficult to give her a fair hearing on this one when the production is as messy as it is. And the same fate sadly occurs on one of the more inspired guest coups on this one, courtesy of the Sugababes on Nice to Know You. Yep, the same girl band who Pink actually interpolates on the chorus of the original get brought in to add some new lyrics to the pot, leading to a fun little verse that features some great interplay from the current lineup of the band. I mean, I know they're legacy artists at this point, but there's still a chance that one or all of them could be replaced. But as a whole, I find this remix too difficult to enjoy because the production just sounds like trash. Again, they've gone for a wumpier techno beat, and for some reason they've EQ'd the original strings so that they're half muffled throughout. Which just makes it sound like cotton wool's fallen down one of the channels. It seems like one of the big problems with this first disc is that a lot of the production elements get switched up without a great deal of care for the nuances of the original songs or the styles of the guest vocalists that they're bringing in, so overall this disc feels a bit thrown together despite there being some genuine standouts. The second disc shifts the focus onto producer-based remixes, all tackling it from a dance floor perspective, and it kicks off with the most high-octane banger of the lot, courtesy of Nia Archives. I already reviewed her version in a roundup video earlier this year, but coming back to it now, it still slaps. The 17 remix on disc 1 fell into a consistent trend I've seen this year where modern replications of rave can just focus on the cosmetics without any of the fun idiosyncrasies. But Archives has no such problems, as she's got the playful spirit of rave down to a T here. The piano here sounds goofy as all hell, there's a pleasingly indulgent repetition of the lyrical refrains. You got some toasting from a Jamaican MC at the beginning. And of course, the obligatory samples from children's media.
What?
This is illegal. This is illegal.
It's also kind of funny to me how she just squashes the Underworld sample at the beginning, as if to say, we won't be needing this. But yeah, still like this one a lot, and it's followed by a heck of a contrast from Kaytranada on his Girl Like Me remix. I saw that the Pitchfork review of this album said this remix sounds like roughly every other Kaytranada remix in recent history, and I do not agree. Like his Tinashe and Mariah Carey remixes in the last year or so sound nothing like this. Having said that though, now that I've listened to some of his own work, including his previous collaboration with Pink herself, I can definitely hear that he has a preferred sound. He likes those mid-tempo Detroit house grooves and synthesizers that sound a bit dishevelled. And I really like their application on Girl Like Me, slowing down the vocals and adding a chord progression that lets the drama of the song fester some more. Particularly like those shimmering sci-fi keys he belts out halfway through. And the bass wanders really fluidly on this one, making for another winner. More house follows courtesy of a remix from Basement Jaxx, another of Pink's sample sources that have stepped in to do a rework. Although unlike the Sugababes, they're not remixing either the tracks they had a credit on, but instead Tonight. I've not heard any new Basement Jaxx for a while. A glance at their recent CV shows that they've been doing music for children's shows such as What's On Your Head and The Rubbish World of Dave Spud. But very little of that childlike whimsy seems to have made it onto this remix, which is a serious progressive house number. The beat's a stomper with some minor key chord progressions and some misty violin sample. The sound design on this is pretty sumptuous. I like the way that the various melodies and harmonies evolve across the track. I have to admit I'm not overly convinced that this eerie mood they've put together here matches up entirely with Pink's light-hearted flirtations. There are instances where I think applying a contradictory mood to a vocal performance can yield some really potent results, but here it just feels a little agnostic about the original song. It's still pretty solid though, despite my hang-ups. A more fluid approach to Tonight comes from Joe Goddard, who has been on quite the roll of remixes this year, either by himself or with his various hot chip bandmates. Built around a pseudo Jersey club beat, we get a lovely mixture of light and shade throughout his version. With some crepuscular chords and flute-like synths building upon the euphoric waft of the original, but with a minor key bass and an existential robot belch to augment things. This one's a nicely innovative rework that I think approaches the dark side of the relationship being discussed a little more subtly than the Basement Jaxx one, and it also adds some detail and colour that I felt was lacking a bit from the original. We also get some more pleasing emotional shifts on the remix of Nice to Know You from Sega Bodega, who turns in probably the hardest remix to pin down genre-wise, which is perhaps to be expected since he's done production work for other art poppers like Shy Girl and Bjork and Rosalia. This is, I guess, kind of a progressive R&B / Balearic disco suite that initially plays against the song's inherent melancholy. Bodega then proceeds to rug pull on that vibe with an off-bar key change that sends Pink right back into the doldrums. And mood-wise, she only gets lower in the track's run-out with a further pitching down. As metaphors go, it's pretty blunt, but in a pleasingly unexpected way. And although the slim 2.5 minute runtime maybe makes this one a little too ephemeral to stick in the mind as much as some of the others, it's definitely one of the most interesting takes here compositionally. But where the Goddard and Bodega remixes managed to do a vibe shift in a really collected and enjoyable manner, the second half of this disc is given over to takes that seem somewhat more erratic and restless. You've got DJ Caio Prince and Adame DJ's version of Stars, which kicks off as a fairly unassuming Bale Funk rework of the original. But then just goes full on kitchen sink on the beats, throwing in break beats, squeaky toys, farting bass lines, clown horns, and even a speed garage fake out at one point. It feels a bit like the audio equivalent of one of those Mario Maker levels that just has a million momentum sapping traps in it. At the very least, it's miles better than the other Bale Funk remix here, courtesy of Loukeman and Leod. Their version of Nice to Know You doesn't seem to have a clue how to match up their own funky percussion with the future garage beats of the original, so they barely even try. I know this kind of sharp ping-ponging between dense melodic elements and sparse rhythmic elements is a commonplace and accepted trope in club remixes, but I don't know, I've always found this sort of thing really lazy. Like, at least try and make it sound like both parts belong in the same song. More odd juxtapositions come from Brazilian DJ Mochakk with his version of Noises. That initially almost sounds like it's going to be a vaporwave version with the slowed down guitar and vocals and a sleepy two-step beat. But then after a couple of minutes of this forced ambient vibe, it fits into a hefty speed garage beat. So 2 different forms of garage in one song. Oh yeah. It is more seamlessly integrated than some of the genre shifts I could mention so far, but there's just a general lethargy to this take that makes it feel like less of a sleeper hit and more of just a sleeper. We do get the classic M1 organ 2 sound towards the end as well, which I am this close to issuing a moratorium on. It's like, for God's sake, find another keyboard sound at this point, please. And on the subject of Groove Armada, they also get roped in for a remix, just like fellow sample providers Basement Jaxx. Now, I want to preface this section by saying that there are crossover dance artists who are not particularly my favourites, but I fully understand why they're in the GOAT conversation. The Prodigy, the Chemical Brothers, Basement Jaxx. Whether I love any of their work or not, all of them have strong, assertive bodies of work with a recognisable sound. I have never understood the amount of hype that Groove Armada have received over the years. I have finally grown to appreciate At the River for its proto-hauntology qualities, and I'd be lying if I said I'd never had fun with super styling. But the rest of their catalogue seems so chronically forgettable and slight that I cannot imagine why anyone would be excited by it. You know, ignoring this adorable music video, of course. And in going into this review, it did not help that when I first started researching for this channel a few years ago, I came across Groove Armada's remix of Paul Simon's classic You Can Call Me Al, which has some of the biggest we don't know what to do with this iconic song vibes I've heard from any remix in the last 5 years. So the well has been poisoned for me for this review, but I'm into a good redemption story.
I want a shot at redemption.
Artists surprise me all the time with remixes, so using all of my mental fortitude, I managed to put all of my prejudices to one side when reviewing this Groove Armada remix of PinkPantheress. And it did not help because this remix is garbage. It has 2 ideas, which admittedly is more than some artists have in their entire career, but they seem entirely clueless as to what to do with either of them. One part of this remix is this stumbling 808 drum pattern accompanied with some adult contemporary keys over the top, which is an intriguing start for sure, but it turns out to be as far as they can actually develop this idea. Then once they've ridden that groove out for an indeterminate amount of time, they switch to a completely flavourless house beat with the slightest bass line. And just in case you thought they were going too soft on this remix, have they got a bass drop for you? The answer is no. These wob-wobs here are comically overcranked for what they are.
What do you think? I don't know. It's in your face. It's just... I don't like it. Oh, well, I do.
This doesn't sound like the work of 2.5-decade veterans of dance music. This legitimately sounds like the work of someone who's just glad they found the bottom for the bass line. And surely if you were going to get someone from the sample pool to do a remix here, Underworld were available? They did a remix of Halsey a few years ago that was heavy on mandolin. Surely their take would have been more interesting than this. The disc ends with Kilimanjaro's remix of Romeo, and it makes for a bit of a weird closer to this album, because it's just a straight up speed garage version. No cross-genre shenanigans, no big emotional flips, just a thumping beat, M102s, M102, some heavily filtered snippets of the string section, and Pink's chorus sounding somewhat slow and out of place. It's got the muscle of speed garage at least, and I like some of the tension when it's building up to the drop. But compared to the original Romeo, this feels pretty anticlimactic. So that is fancy some more, and in answer to the title's question, I would say yes. but only some more. To an extent, this feels like the first real post-Still Brat remix album that kind of misses the point, roping in a sizable and enviable list of collaborators without thinking too hard about how best to use them. To be honest though, I think it's largely unfair to compare this to Still Brat. Charli XCX had a decade and a half of releases and collaborations under her belt, so creating a narrative-challenging, expectation-flouting remix accompaniment to Brat would be easier for her than someone who's only a few mixtapes into their career and still figuring out their sound. In fact, if there's one big remix album from recent memory that Fancy Some More reminded me of a lot more, it's Mixers of a Lost World by The Cure. Overlong and inoptimally sequenced, but there are absolutely some highlights from the journey that are well worth preserving. And thus, as far as my favourites go from Fancy Some More, there's definitely a few honourable mentions to put out there. The remixes from Nia Archives and Kaytranada made for a cracking start to the second disc, nailing their respective takes on hardcore drum and bass and Detroit house. And of the guest verse versions, I really liked what Rachel Chinouriri brought to the table on Romeo, bringing a similarly playful character to that of Pink herself and forming a duo I'd honestly love to hear more from. Favourite remix for me though was the Oklou version of Girl Like Me, a surprisingly well fleshed out and timely trip-hop rendition that easily goes toe-to-toe with the already strong original. Least favourite remixes, unfortunately I had a few dishonourable mentions marked out for this one as well. I think both the Sugababes and Zara Larsson features were promising, but ruined by some mystifyingly indeterminate production choices, and the Loukeman Leod version of Nice to Meet You felt really phoned in terms of how they added their own elements to the original. But at least that remix kind of understood what was good about the original, which is more than I can say for the Groove Armada remix of Stateside, easily my least favourite of the batch. I'm just frankly baffled that two of the longest serving producers here managed to sound like someone aimlessly pouring away at a DAW for the first time. And is this collection of remixes better than the original? Partly. This is one of those remix albums where the lows are low but the highs are pretty high, and I feel the versions from Archives, Kaytranada, Oklou and Joe Goddard do genuinely give the originals a run for their money. Honestly though, I think regardless of Fancy Some More's overall quality, its main utility to me is how it maps out some potential developmental steps for PinkPantheress. Building her sound around found hooks from the exotic far-off land of the UK certainly has given her an edge up until now, but it's the kind of well that can run dry or at the very least predictable, and very much falls to the mercy of what she finds in her record collection next. This remix album spread the net wider to a great variety of club sounds and a larger pool of collaborators, and it's good to have this kind of project now whilst Pink is still in the formative stages of her career, as it throws out a whole bunch of possibilities for where she could go next. Anyway, that is my review. Do you agree, disagree? Got any favourites or least favourites from these albums? Or any favourite samples from Pink's songs? Let me know in the comments below. Also feel free to point me in the direction of any other remix albums you think I should be reviewing, and hit that subscribe button if you fancy some more content like this in the future. Thank you very much for watching. This review is over.
Yeah.